usual, and I have a feeling we're coming into summer.
Right.
And last day of school tomorrow for the big school board. So let's see how yeah, there's still some people trickling in, but yeah, I'd like to get started. I'll start with the land acknowledgement and introduction, and we'll go from there. So thank you, Sherrie, for coming and speaking to us. We do start with the land acknowledgement, and Ottawa is built on the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. And the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor them and this land. Today we have Sherrie Kelly speaking to us. It's an intriguing topic for anyone involved in scholarly activity, whether it be research, education, clinical scholarship, and communication of the work we do is an important part of scholarship and publishing through peer-reviewed systems and high-quality journals is a vital element of that communication. So we're really happy to have you join us to talk about strategies for publishing success. So Sherrie and I overlapped at Bourne actually a long time ago now, and so it's good to see her again. She received her PhD in disease modeling in 2017 from Monash University in Australia, and holds a Master's of Science in Biochemistry and Medical Genetics and a BSc Honors in Medical Genetics. She joined the Lancet in 2024 as the first Canadian-based editor at the Lancet Group. For the past 20 years, she's collaborated with over 30 low and middle income countries to better invest in their HIV, TB, malaria, and maternal child health, as well as COVID responses. Her research interests also extended to climate health and health systems strengthening. Before joining the Lancet, she has served as a deputy editor with the JIAS, so Journal of the International AIDS Society, and scientific researcher at UNAIDS in Switzerland, and at health institutions in Australia, Denmark, and Canada. So a really international formation experience. She was honored to have been a keynote speaker at IAS 2019 and a speaker at AIDS 2020. So thanks again, Sherrie, for coming, and look forward to your presentation.
Thanks for the kind introduction, Pranish, and for allowing me to speak with everyone. It's really nice to be back in the sort of halls of CHEO and to really hear from you. So I'm going to give a presentation from, behind the curtain with the Lancet. And it's really about me leaving time for, this group, who it's highly published, to ask any questions that you ever wanted to ask an editor. And as the introduction said, I'm the first Canadian-based Lancet editor. Lancet Group is 201 years old, so it's high time that we have somebody on the ground here. And so I'm really here to serve you and to advocate and bring forward your medical and scientific interests with the Lancet and beyond. So here are some of the things from the points that I was, highlighted to address. So, I can talk about lots of different things, but basically the items in black are the things I'm going to touch on, and the other items are extra material that I've hidden, but I can address later if you have a particular interest in any of them. So the first thing really is just to go over, the Lancet Group. Before I joined, I knew, of course, about the Lancet from an author's point of view. And now, of course, being from, like I said, the inside, I know a lot more about what they have to offer. And I thought I would share that with you today. So, of course, we're all familiar with things like, submitting an article for an RCT, a randomized clinical trial, and things like meta-analysis. But there are also, of course, reviews, and we do seminars. There are pieces called health policy, therapeutics, which are extremely clinical. There are comment pieces, clinical pictures, correspondence, letters, and world reports that we have commissioned. And I actually, since I've been with the Lancet, suggested 2 world reports, one on pharmacare and one on the lack of Canadian doctors. So those have come out recently, and it's really, highlighting some of the issues that we're grappling with here. Another thing that the Lancet can offer is, of course, we strive to, process all submissions in a very timely manner. But if something is of particular need for extremely expedited service, especially if you're trying to time it with a meeting presentation, we can offer what we call fast track. And that means from when you submit it to when we publish it, it's 28 days. And that's, provided there's no extensive revisions that would delay that service, but it's something that we can offer. So you can mark your paper as, fast track, and then you can have it expedited if it meets the requirements. I'm just going to minimize this so it's not in the way. And of course, we have things around open access publication and funding solutions for certain authors, especially from lower and middle income countries. So the point is not to prevent any piece from being published because of any kind of publication fee. So we can work with you on that if needed. So here's the history of the Lancet Group. And I don't necessarily want to force you to put your hand up or put in the chat, but I'm just curious if anyone thinks, when I had to guess how many journals there are with the Lancet, I would never have guessed 24. And maybe you have your favorites, like the original Lancet, of course, but maybe in this group, the Child and Adolescent Health, which is over here, which was launched in 2017, is of particular interest, maybe public health or digital health or things like that. And we also have regional journals. So if something is of particular interest to the Americas, for instance, it could be sent there. But the beauty of submitting with the Lancet is that you can, for instance, submit to the Lancet journal what we call the weekly, because we publish it weekly. And if we think that maybe it's not best placed there, we can actually ask you if you would like to have it offered to another journal in our 24 journal family. And instead of having to resubmit, it can just go to a different journal within our group. We also have 2 what we call discovery series journals, and they're the e-clinical medicine and e-biomedicine within our set. And these are there of the 24, there are 12 fully open access journals. That means basically the reader doesn't have to pay. They may have to register their email, but it's basically free to access. And all content, of course, is immediately freely available, and the copyright is retained by you, the authors. And then we have the other set, which is called hybrid, and it's basically where we have open access solutions and some paid solutions. So there are specific funders with which we have arrangement solutions. So it depends on what CHEO holds there. But basically to say, this is our global footprint. So we have 144 editors that are full-time and paid, and we have a lot of other support people within the group. Mainly, of course, the Lancet launched in London, in the UK, but we have editors and staff in all parts of the world, mainly. And now you'll see, of course, I am located in Ottawa, so we're on the map here, but you can have a lot of coverage. And then also we can have sort of, 24-hour coverage in terms of the processing, so it can speed things up. So just to say, of course, our main concern, and we put this absolutely first, is advancing equity, diversity and inclusion. So we want to make sure that across all the pieces and all the things that we do, that we make an effort basically to drive equity in terms of achieving sustainable development agenda. And we want to make sure that both authors and also material gets an equal look and an equal representation in our journal. So what we publish, and I said a little bit about this, and we classify this as different colors, but basically if we're talking about what we call, red content, these are things like research articles, meta-analysis, etc. But the other pieces are here in the different sections, and some of which are not reviewed or edited by us, but it's really something that the authors would put forward, and it gets sort of like a light touch, whereas the articles are peer-reviewed and extensively edited. And then if you want to, this was the #1 question coming from CHEO. So what are we looking for? So the first thing that we're looking for are really high impact randomized controlled trials, phase 2, 3, or higher. So advanced trials that are large, if possible, multi-center, if possible, even multi-country, things that have a really good primary outcome. that would change clinical practice. So that is really like the top tier. But then, of course, we're looking for large meta-analyses, observational studies, interventional trials, things with really good design that don't have any issues with them, and that we think will be of, really high interest to a broad readership. Other things that are considered by some of the 24 journals are things like case series and reports, any kind of qualitative research, so things like surveys, things that have a post hoc study. But out of scope, we don't actually publish trial protocols in the Lancet, but we can, of course, link to a trial protocol that was published in another journal. And we're not focused, at least, on methodological studies, things that are really granular. They would probably be best placed elsewhere. So feel free to, I don't have access to the chat, but Pranesh, if you want to help me, just sort of moderate. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them as we go. Just let me know. And so again, the things we look for in terms of positives are novelty. So is your study something that's new? Is it going to make a big splash? What's the question? If it's really a broad question that needs answering, that doesn't have a lot of evidence out there, or again, that's going to really change practice and better lives, that's what we look out for. Any kind of like technique that's new in terms of treatment or prevention, and strong conclusions, of course. Not to say that a negative outcome isn't something we would publish, we do, but of course, if it's a positive outcome, then it gets like, a little bit more usually interest. So other things are if, it's going to affect policy, especially if it's, local policy or international policy, and is it important to society? So like I said, this is sort of the pyramid, if you would say, very large systematic reviews, of course, are something that everyone will read, RCTs, and then it goes down like cohort, case control, case reports. Of course, if the case report we look for things that are involving 10 participants, 10 patients or more, just for, desensitizing the, sort of in terms of the anonymity, and things that have expert opinions. So, in terms of sample size, it also depends, because if you're a certain cohort or your population group is extremely rare, then it might be small. And of course, that if that's supported and justified, then that was something we take into consideration. In terms of a trial, especially a good study design, the right controls, if you validated it, if you did a sensitivity analysis, any kind of assumptions that were used, and of course, following guidelines like CONSORT. I'm sure this group is well aware of these things. And transparency in reporting. I mean, when we read a lot of papers in a day, and so if it takes us a long time to figure it out, then we would have to work with the group to make sure that the message we are really interpreting it properly, and that it would be clear to the readership. But these things can be, of course, debated on and worked together on. But if you, of course, have really transparency and you're not over reporting, just sometimes the conclusions are overstatements, then it definitely makes it easier from the beginning. If there's ethics needed, of course, ethics approval has to be obtained, informed consent, and all these kinds of things are just things you look for immediately. The first thing I look for is ethics. The second thing I look for in a trial is, was it registered before the recruitment or enrollment started? And were the guidelines adhered to? These are basics, but you would be surprised how many, because I'm the lead preprints editor, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, how many people don't state when they started the recruitment. So I have to really dig and sometimes go back to authors, and that just delays the process. So if you make it really evident, then that definitely makes our job easier, makes the editors happier. And all of this is actually in the information to authors PDF. And I know that there's always a lot to read and lots to follow, but yeah, it's really important, these key points. So some of the negatives, I mean, this is just the counter, right? If you, things like if you plagiarize, that's obvious. Like if there's no comparator group in the study, if it's underpowered, unfortunately, it's difficult to like bring it to a statistician, which we get for every submission in terms of the peer review process. And if there's just a poor question, what we call salami slicing is, if you're really taking little pieces of your study and putting out bit by bit, of course, then it has a less robust overall impact. So I'll just say these things are in terms of best practice guidance from the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors and the Committee for Publication Ethics, COPE. So we follow, of course, these publishing excellence guidelines. So, okay, deciding what to get published. So this is the journey of your paper. So we treat each and every submission individually. If there is something what we call a pre-submission, maybe you've done that, where you send a letter saying, hey, do you think there'd be interest here? We look at every single thing that comes to us. So if you send it, we will look at it. But basically you have your submitted paper, and then unless it gets this pre-screening, it may get rejected because it doesn't meet the criteria. For instance, it's a methods paper, but then it gets assigned to an editor. We take it to what's called a pre-review meeting. We have 2 of them a week, on Fridays and on Wednesdays. If then the group of everyone can attend, and all the editors, and they do, and they comment on it, and before and during the meeting. And then we said, okay, we think it's worth sending to peer review. So we pick our peer reviewers. Again, we have a statistician that reviews, one statistician, not the same one, of course, but we have a pool from which we choose. And then we have at least 3 full reviewers looking at the paper and sending us comments. If we don't think the comments are sufficient, then we even invite more people. And then once we get back the reviews, we take it to an editorial meeting. There are 2 a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and everyone, again, all the editors, including the editor-in-chief, Richard Horton, looks at these things and gives their feedback. And then if we think, okay, the reviews look good, we send it back to you, the author. Then we get your revision, we look at that, and then there might be a few back and forth. And then if the paper hopefully gets accepted, then it would move forward to production. And so this is just a flow diagram, basically, again, of what I said. But the thing I mentioned is, if unfortunately you would submit it to the Lancet Weekly and we don't think it's best placed there, we can offer to you to submit it to a different journal within the Lancet Group. So I don't want to talk too much about this, but basically, like I said, in terms of the reviewer, we look for people with, experience in this field, even people with lived experience. So we try to carefully select our peer reviewers. Unfortunately, of course, this is something that, unless it's a fast track, the peer reviewers are not paid. So it's really they're volunteering their time. So it's sometimes difficult to get peer reviewers, but we give them 7 days to send their review. If it's a fast track, they get 2 days. So it's even more expedited, but so we really appreciate if you've been a reviewer and if you are a reviewer, all the efforts there. But we basically want a thorough critique, and we want helpful feedback. So after the acceptance, basically we were preparing your paper for publication. So you don't have to do anything in terms of, how the tables look, these kinds of things. You just have to send us the editable files, and we work with you to do the whole layout and the editing. One thing to mention that's unique in the Lancet, and this is something that, when you're doing your submission, we have a section called the research and context. It has 3 sections, so please do include that, because that's actually one of the first things after the cover letter and ethics that we look for, and it's basically telling us what the impact of the paper is. So again, what's the impact once your paper is accepted and published in the Lancet? Why choose us? Well, the Lancet Group has, around 37 million annual visits in terms of our platforms, and there are almost, 100 million downloaded articles each year. So you're going to get a lot of, eyes on your work. So that's one reason, of course. And, if you think it's best placed in our journal because of the sort of content for each of the journals, we definitely invite you to consider us. And in terms of this, actually, this was just updated just 2 days ago. So I will just leave this here. But if you want to go to the updated citation index, it's basically all the journals in terms of this last year, the impact factors have just shifted down because of, after the pandemic, things have kind of cooled a little bit. But basically, if you're comparing the Lancet, that's again the top one in the weekly. This is something that, we're around 98 now. It seems like a big jump down, but that's across the board. If you want to compare to the different journals like the New England Journal, JAMA, for instance, Nature, of course, we are having a higher impact factor than them, even though, of course, there are other factors at play. So you can take a look for the different 24 journals in our family, the different impact factors, if that's something that that factors into your decision-making process. And these are all posted now online. So in terms of then people finding your paper, not every journal, I didn't know this, is of course indexed, what we call, so that people can find it in these different indexing services. So you might look, for instance, to PubMed or Scopus or Medline or whatever your most favorite indexing tool is. But basically the Lancet would be, any Lancet group journal would be found in any of these services. And we have, of course, alerts. And again, that's people just getting the table of contents usually sent to their email. But we have over 3.6 million subscriptions. So there's a lot of people getting the content. And social media, in terms of, Twitter, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it. We have someone who's dedicated to this. And basically we have nearly 2.4 million followers. So we also work with the authors for the really high impact papers, especially, or things we think should go out there, to post it on our sites so that we get people clicking and reading and making comments and sharing these kinds of things. And then in terms of news articles, so I get a daily, all the editors get a daily summary of all the papers and articles and pieces that have been published in the Lancet Group and where they got covered by the different news outlets. So for instance, here we might have, the CBC or, BBC or CNN or whatever you follow, New York Times, Washington Post, etc. So anytime they follow any piece that's been published, we get a notice. And so there's definitely a lot of mention here. It's, almost 300,000 annual mentions in news articles, and that's from pieces in the Lancet. You may listen already to the Lancet Voice, and that's the podcast. The original podcast. We have, of course, different flavors. So the child and adolescent health. So it's a different way to receive the information. If you want to be a podcast participant, you can let us know if you have something to say. And of course, that's just another way to get your message out there. And again, webinars, the webinars are recorded always and posted online, and they've been viewed more than 5,000 times in total by audience in 170 countries. And these kinds of ways are ways of bringing people together to really continue the discussion around the content that's being published. So I wanted to show you, I know that this group is well aware of the publication, the exemplary publication record from CHEO, but basically we put together two slides that are specific to the submissions and publications that have come out of CHEO. And basically this is in the last few years, so from 2019 to 2024. We basically said, the Lancet journals with CHEO affiliated authors. So we did a search from our database, and these are the numbers up top here. So from 0 to 10, in terms of course, this makes a lot of sense between the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health, that would presumably be CHEO's main target in terms of publishing with the Lancet. And over this time, you can see, of course, in 2020, presumably having to do with the COVID pandemic, there were a lot of publications that were published in this journal. But across the board, even at the Lancet, of course, there were a couple of pieces that were published. And it's not easy to get into the Lancet Weekly. The acceptance rate is 5%. So it's a real feather in your cap when you get these kind of publications. And this is only in the recent years. I'm sure if we went back in history, there would be just a glut of publications. So congratulations, thank you, and we hope for the continuation of this and even more. And these are just a couple of the most cited Lancet papers. Oh, apologies for this typo here. I'll have to fix this, with CHEO affiliated authors. So I just picked a few. Maybe you recognize some of the names. Of course, this was during COVID. There was one in Lancet Neurology, a couple here actually, and this one was from the Lancet Weekly, and it was a study called Protect. So I just wanted to mention these just to showcase some of them. Maybe you were here, or you recognize some of these names, but again, these are some of the things that have been most highly cited from that recent pick of the CHEO publications. So again, reasons to publish with the Lancet Group. Of course, here I'm here to talk to you about publishing success in general, but if this is the Lancet Group feels right to you, we would just want to let you know that of course there's expert guidance We have, like I said, 144 editors from a wide variety of backgrounds. A lot of them are MDs, many surgeons. There are, of course, people that focus on maternal child health, infectious diseases, etc. So we can assign your paper to an editor that has the experience needed to handle your paper, but also, of course, we're choosing peer reviewers that are experts in their field so that they can give good feedback. We feel that we offer personal support, so each and every paper is handled as its own case, and we help guide you through the process. And I hope you've had good experience in the past and you will continue to do so. If you have any suggestions or any concerns, just let us know. And I feel that we're quite responsive. Like I showed you in terms of the global reach and the high impact, so it's a truly international audience. You don't have to tell people what the Lancet is. When you say it, they know, and it's highly regarded. And then so it's something that I think you can feel if you're submitting and publishing there that you'll get a lot of traction. And ultimately, it's about improving lives. We're about the best science for better lives, and that's why we're here and we're promoting these pieces. So just let us know if there are things that are gaps and that we think you need to make us aware of, and that's something that we're always interested in: new angles, things that we haven't published before, etc., and of course new opinions. So I just wanted to show you, I don't want to go over each person, but this is our sort of more executive editorial team. And this is Richard Horton, editor-in-chief. This is my boss, Miriam Sabin. She's the North American senior executive editor based in New York City. I also go there, of course. And then we have a variety of people across the world who are working hard to make sure that they're recruiting the best science and working with you. Here are our other editors. I'm with the senior editors group right now. And then we have, editors-in-chief from each of the 24 journals. So these are the people that maybe you've worked with one-on-one. For instance, Esther Lau for the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health. They would be making the ultimate decision as to what gets in to their specific journal. Here are the others. So it's a lot. It's a big group. And again, we meet every day. So we have a lot of exchanges. And I wanted to just thank you for your attention and to take any questions and provide you with answers. So thank you so much. Back to you, Pranesh.
All right, thanks, Sherrie. See, Roger has a question. There was a question earlier from Christina in the chat. Within the group of systematic reviews, is the Lancet interested in scoping reviews as well?
Yes, absolutely, we are. And so it's something that we actually look for. So if you have one, please send it to us. That is high on our list.
Right. Okay, thanks, Roger.
Thank you for such a great summary of the process, Sherrie. A lot of us will work with trainees and junior people who will spend a lot of time writing the paper, but not put a lot of emphasis on the abstract. And I've always had the philosophy that that's probably the first thing that editors read. And I just wanted to get maybe a look under the hood and see if that's true or not, because I will put a lot of my effort into the abstract, because if the abstract's poorly written, my sense is it doesn't make the pass muster. And what are your thoughts on that? And if you had any thoughts or comments on abstracts?
You are absolutely correct. So if the abstract, of course, isn't something that piques our interest, we will still look at the paper, but it's the abstract that first grabs us. I actually didn't realize how much emphasis is also placed on the cover letter. So in the cover letter, and of course, I know you're very experienced with this, and this whole group is, but it's not about repeating the abstract. It's really about pointing out, why this paper is important, who's going to be interested in it, and maybe if you want to do a fast track, why you need it rushed. Are you presenting at this such and such meeting? And maybe also to say this trial is new because it adds on to trial of phase 2, and this is a phase 3. So in the few points in the cover letter, really point these out, because that is the first thing we look at, is the cover letter. And I find, at least even I didn't spend a lot of time on the cover letter. It was something I drafted, at the last few days, and it's the first thing that's looked at. And then the abstract, absolutely a good abstract that's well crafted, that is clear, that has, especially for trials, please, because I'm the preprints editor, that says when you started recruiting, that I can show, that I can look and quickly see that, you know, you recruited after you registered, what's your primary outcome. And in your interpretation, we call these sections, you know, interpretation instead of conclusion. You know, what impact is this paper going to have, especially if it's broad. And the next thing is that section called the research in contents, which we term the RIC. So if that's missing, then we think, well, did you look at, you know, the instructions for authors? You know, you can add it later, but it's going to hurt you if you don't put it in at the beginning, because then we have to go back to you. It's going to take at least 2 days or whatever it'll just delay the process. So yes, abstract, 100%. Write the paper, then rewrite the abstract, and look at have everyone you know to look at the abstract, because it's so important. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Sherrie. Nisha had a question in the chat. Thank you for speaking with us today. Are Vanguard studies considered?
Yes, so if I could just ask you for an example, what you mean by Vanguard, that would help me to address the question.
Sure, thank you. So, you know, it's a bit more than, in my mind, it's a bit more than just a pilot study. It's looking at the feasibility of the study in a population that's not typically studied. It's looking at novel metrics, and yeah, so it's just, I think, a little bit more fleshed out than piloting it in a new population. And maybe I'm actually being more narrow in my definition or my understanding of pilot studies, but that's what I understood for a Vanguard. So it's a bit more than just a protocol, because you are trialing it in a population, but it will be more of a feasibility study to inform a larger trial, but still has a fair bit of novelty to it in terms of the metrics and the outcomes being assessed and the population being observed.
Right. So I would say absolutely, especially if it's an underserved population, like you said, if it's something that's new in terms of metrics, et cetera. It's something we would definitely consider. Of course, I can't promise that it would land at the weekly. Sometimes we offer these types of papers to that discovery science journal that we call like ECM or eClinical Medicine, just because they are the best place to show the new science or the new clinical you know, submissions, and they have a very high impact factor. So if you get into ECM, it's of course under the Lancet Group, everyone knows that, but I think that might sometimes be the avenue, but it's not to say that it couldn't go to a different journal within the family. So definitely, even if you want, you can send us, and you can send it directly to me, and you can send us some pre-submission. So say, you know, basically you would include a cover letter, and if you have a draft even of your abstract, to say what would the reaction be to this kind of submission, and we can basically give you our, you know, 1 or 2 day feedback and just say, yes, we think we're interested, we would like to invite you. So if you want to get earlier feedback so that you don't, you know, do a lot of formatting and then later on, unfortunately, it wouldn't be best place, but do send it to us. And the other thing to mention is that if you're interested, we have what we call the SDMJ, the Science and Technology Medical Journals. So we have 2,775, if I'm not wrong, journals that are owned by Elsevier, which is our publishing house. And so it can even go to those journals if that's something of interest. So just do run it our way. So the answer is yes. Thanks.
Yeah, so Sherrie, there's kind of 2 related questions, maybe the same question. I had the same question written down. I think some of us have called editors, emailed them, especially if you know them, and
Yes.
say, hey, I think this is a good fit for your journal. Here's, you know, kind of a quick outline of what the study is or what the paper would be about. So Roger wrote it nicely. I mean, there's a couple of things here, but you know, I have worked with colleagues at other institutions. You've worked with colleagues here, Roger. I've done this, right? Who will contact an editor to gauge interest prior to submitting to a journal. I have not done this myself. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yes. So thanks, Roger, and others who have a similar question. Pre-submission, absolutely. I mean, even today's meeting, I think we had 6 or 7 pre-submissions that we brought straight away. So you can call me, you know, I don't have an actual number, I have WhatsApp, but you can email me, we can be in touch, and I can take it to the group, and we can see, do we think it's the right fit? And we can come back to you and say, well, maybe if you send us this, that could help, bump it up. Or yes, we would like to invite you. And also then we're expecting it. So for instance, if you're saying, okay, I need to present in September, I need to have it published by the end of August, then we can prime ourselves for the actual submission. And especially if we're going to be offering you fast track. And so it just sort of like readies the track in terms of your submission. So I highly encourage pre-submission. It doesn't have to take a lot of your time. You can send me an email with just even a title, and then it'll be considered.
Thanks, Sherrie. And one of the related questions was, Lancet Group, a lot of the publishing groups are now getting very big with a very diverse set of journals.
Mm-hmm.
It's often hard to choose the journal to submit to. Is it better to call and ask, or is it maybe better just to submit it to the Lancet and you guys triage it from there?
Yeah, you can approach it however you feel comfortable. I mean, if you know the content, table of content from, let's say, the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health, and you think, okay, this is where it needs to be because that is your maybe target audience, then send it there. If you're just not sure, you can ask. And it never hurts to send it to, of course, the Lancet Weekly. And then, like I said, it can be offered throughout the family. So you can't really lose. It's really up to you and where you'd like to see your paper land. But if you're not sure, just ask. Absolutely. Yeah. I put in my email again into the chat, and I'll share the slides and it's there.
Perfect. Yeah, I think, just to call it an undercurrent in this line of questioning is it is a lot of work to, you've kind of written the outline of your paper's mainly written, but each journal has their very specific formatting and, length requirements, emphasis. So before going to all that work for a journal, if they're not going to consider it, or not consider it highly, then is it worth all that work for the journal? So I just wanted to call that out from the author side. I'm sure you remember that, Sherrie.
I do. Well, and still, I mean, some of my papers are still going in. So I'm with you on this. I mean, if you want to have an early, finger on the pulse, just ask us. And especially if we have, a relationship with you, we know the author group, we can, of course, then respond even more quickly. But I get it. You don't want to have to keep reformatting, resubmitting. It's just, we want to make your time the best because we know that, you're spending your time doing the clinical work and the science. So let us help you with the lifting there, and we can, in a very quick succession, get back to you.
Great. We have a hand up. I think it's Dr. Batra. There's two. The tag is G Batra. Do you have a question? Or is that an accidental hand? Okay. I'll put it in the. Okay, Roger has. I do have one other question before I go back to Roger. What I wrote down, you were talking about peer review, Sherrie, and volunteer peer review, and peer review, especially with the timelines that are desired and the proliferation of journals, can become a lot of work. And I go through phases where I just decline everything. So really two questions is, where's the publishing industry going in terms of better recognition of the work of peer review? I don't want to ask the question as should you pay peer reviewers, but that's one form of recognition. It is supporting a for-profit industry as well. Where's the industry going in terms of recognizing peer reviewers?
Right. So absolutely. And I mean, I've peer reviewed myself, and I know it's, extra time over and above all your duties and your, your demand on time. I used to look at it as well, someone's peer reviewing my paper, so I sort of give back, and I tried to do maybe like 1 or 2 a month. That was sort of my general guideline, but it just depends on the person. I thought if I'm going to read the paper anyways, I might as well peer review it. But we absolutely recognize, in terms of gratitude, the reviewers, and especially those who get back to us and who are able to provide very useful and quick feedback. I realize that Elsevier and the Lancet is a for-profit group, and we don't want to restrict anyone's readership, so that's why we offer the open access services where we can and work with authors in terms of the fees. But in terms of the peer review and where it's going, I understand there are many journals, lots of invites, and so who do you say yes to? And so at least for the fast track, there is a recognition, especially around the 2-day timelines. Our statisticians are paid a small fee so that we can, because they need to go through the paper with like a lot of detailed scrutiny. There's, a list of things they need to look for. But in terms of the recognition, it's not something that we would, at this point, we don't have what we call open reviews. So we don't post the reviews. And that's basically to allow reviewers to feel as though they can be open, but also if there is a comment that we don't find as constructive, we will go back and, there's a bit of a correction there. So it's not something we would send directly to you because we don't think that these kinds of comments should be, directed to the authors. But in terms of recognition, I mean, I'm open to this group for suggestions if you think that there could be, a different model considered. But the reason that there isn't a fee for most reviews is so that they can basically be unbiased, and so that there's some, objectivity. With our regional journals, I know I used to review for them, and they do have some kind of fee just because it's so difficult to get reviewers. So they're just offering some kind of fee payment, small payment, and just a small thank you. But I don't know if I have answered the question directly, but I'm open to feedback in terms of what you think and where it could go. But we've talked about this a lot lately, and this is the question that comes up at conferences, etc. And again, the reason that we do it the way we do it is to allow reviewers to be open and to feel safe, that their comments that they want are, anonymous. But we definitely send our gratitude and appreciate the time required for the reviews, and that it's something that's over and above your everyday work.
Yeah, thanks, Sherrie. Yeah, my question was really about your thoughts on and where the industry is going. So that's helpful.
Yeah.
Roger.
So Sherrie, many of us work in as part, not just in our own institutions, but work as part of networks of study groups. There's a inpatient pediatrics one, there's a emergency pediatrics, there's other, national and international networks. And the studies that are sometimes therefore designed will have large cohorts or large populations in which there will be let's call it the parent paper, but then planned multiple sub-studies. Mm-hmm. When we do those, sometimes the methods are very similar, and to save time, some of us will want to publish the protocol. Is it beneficial to publish that protocol inside the family that you're hoping to publish the main paper in? And therefore, if it was the Lancet family, what would be the ideal journal to look at for a protocol paper? And or two, what are your thoughts on ensuring that the peer reviewers and the editors get a good sense of what the protocol is without having to spend all those words on repeating it, given the fact that the sub-studies may be looking at different populations, et cetera?
Absolutely. So these are like great strategies that you've described. The protocol, unfortunately, is something that we don't publish, but we will definitely refer to either a website that has the protocol or a previously published protocol. And so that's something that you can, and we want you to, in your submission, either include as a separate file, and then we can refer to it. So it can save you a lot of, word counts in terms of repeating things. But we also ask for the unredacted protocol. Often we get the redacted protocol, then we have to ask for the unredacted protocol. And so it's something we compare very closely when we get a trial and we look at the protocol and we want to see what are the amendments, why were they amended, does it match, these kinds of things. So it's very important to have both 100%. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I know a lot of people at U Ottawa are leading the way in open science and in publication and validity and all those important things that you touched upon earlier. And therefore, sometimes the protocol can be published as a preprint online. Any thoughts on that as well? And therefore, any flags with regards to, like, if you publish your preprint online of your protocol, do you need to rewrite the method so you don't self-plagiarize your own method section? And what are your thoughts on that? Because that's always a struggle that you want to avoid, and or what are your thoughts as an editor on that?
Right. So we, of course, have the preprint service. It's called Preprints with the Lancet on SSRN. So when you submit to us, you can opt in to have your paper considered to be eligible to be posted on our preprint server. I look at every single submission. There are like 6,000 a year. So look at every abstract, and about 3,000 of those are posted. So about 20 a day, 5 days a week. But we unfortunately don't publish even a preprint of a protocol just because it's not a research paper, right? But if you have, let's say, medRxiv or something, and the protocol is posted there, you can link to that in your paper with the Lancet. So you don't have to repeat anything. And we actually, within our sort of editorial manager tool, which we get all our submissions in, there's an automatic function that does a comparison. So it does a similarity comparison. So we can see, oh, if it matches really high, why is that? It's because you posted your protocol on a preprint server, and that's fine. It's totally legitimate. There's no problem. There is no downfall to preprint. It is separate. If you get your paper in your protocol somewhere else, if you get your paper published as a preprint in the Lancet, it's separately handled to the actual consideration for your paper. They are separate. So yes, all those pieces and components are absolutely a good practice and valid. Thanks. Thanks.
Can I ask a question that's sort of a basic question?
Sure.
About case reports or case series?
Yes.
If somebody had an interesting patient and published it somewhere else as a case report for that patient, but then over the years amassed, another 9 or 10 of them, could that first person still be included in a case series that we would then submit to the Lancet, or does it have to be all patients who've never been published on before?
There's no requirement there. I've never seen anyone say, well, this, out of 10 case studies, this one was published elsewhere. To me, that's not a problem. Of course, recognizing that there is that original publication and citing it would be something we would want you to do, but it doesn't preclude you from then, later on grouping these cohorts. I mean, if you publish each and every case study separately and then group them up, well, maybe that would be something that would be called salami slicing. But no, that is never been a concern. I mean, I've only been with the Lancet a few months, but no one's ever raised it. So I wouldn't think that's something to worry about.
Well, thanks.
Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Stuart. Erica has her hand up, but Natalie actually Majel has a question as well. Natalie, maybe I can call on you first.
Thank you. I just can't get my camera functioning, so sorry. I would turn it on if I could. Great presentation. Really appreciate you came. My question is around training, developing the skill set of younger reviewers, or maybe some authors that evolve in their career. Do you have a group or a setup where you provide guidance, feedback, and training for the reviewers? And I would see this would build on your expansion of reviewers, skill sets, and probably qualities in the authors as well. And so what's your strategy around that? Do you have that?
Yes, well, thank you so much for the question. Excellent question. So 2 points. So the first one is in terms of the training for the authors. Of course, there's that information for the author's document. It's a PDF. And then there's a separate one for trials, information for the authors. So of course, that information is out there. But then we hope that people find it useful and read it. And if they have any suggestions or questions, just let us know. But over and above that, of course, we have these sessions where we do outreach. And then, of course, you're always welcome afterwards to contact me, not necessarily you yourself, but for instance, your junior colleagues especially. But we do have, if you follow the Lancet, for instance, on LinkedIn or on like Twitter X, we often have seminars that we offer in terms of, guidelines, recommendations, tips for publishing with the Lancet. So we have one coming up with the Lancet Neurology. It's not necessarily specific to neurology, and I think there's another one coming up for planetary health. So these are the kinds of seminars that we give, routinely to help authors, answer questions, give guidance, all these kinds of things. And we hope that that's useful. As far as I know, we don't have necessarily like a workshop per se, but sometimes at a conference, there will be a session or like a symposium session where we have these kinds of things. So you can do it live. And you can participate, you and your colleagues can participate in these kinds of things.
It's okay.
And then the second one is about reviewers. So when we invite a new reviewer that's never, worked with the Lancet Group, we have a list of suggestions that we ask them to look for. So this is the kinds of guidance we have. And then after, when we have the review back, what we call sometimes as thin reviews, where, there really isn't a lot of feedback, especially if someone says reject but doesn't give a reason, we will go back directly to that reviewer and ask questions like, can you give us more information of why you made this recommendation, and can you provide us more detail? So then we guide it on a one-by-one basis. As far as I know, we don't have a workshop specifically for reviewers. We almost, like I said, just give the criteria of, what they need to look for. And then of course we give feedback if as needed. So I hope with those two strategies, we are meeting the mark. I do think that, for instance, especially when you're junior, it's quite intimidating to contact an editor. I didn't when I was first starting out to ask these kinds of questions, but from what I know now from the other side is that we're here to advocate for your paper. It's not as though, oh, we're here to just, reject things and, we're being mean. No, not at all. You should hear the pleas from the editors about publishing things, and they're really vying for the option to have it represented. So I would encourage you to either reach out if you think there's an opportunity for training. I mean, someone asked me to do a small video to speak to their training group, and I can do that. So I can do one-on-one sessions. So I think the options are endless, and these are our strategies in place, but we're always open for either invitations or suggestions to do better. So thank you.
Hey, thanks, Sherrie. Then Erica, your question.
Great.
Or just looking at the chat as well.
Yeah, hi, Sherrie. I really appreciated this opportunity to hear, as you say, from the inside, how just the thought process and the selection process works, and to pick your brain on a few of those questions that we've often wondered about. One for me is publications in more than one journal on a similar topic, and sometimes the same topic, but very different journals. So work that I've done in the past with engineers on artificial intelligence has been published in engineering journals because the trainees who were working on this needed that for their PhD. It was a more relevant journal for them to be in an engineering journal, but then I felt precluded or I wasn't able to then publish that same paper, even though it would have a more clinical spin to it. The engineering journal would already have published the clinical aspects of it to give it relevance. And so I felt handcuffed in my ability to get it into more the clinical arena, to have that information disseminated in a very different sphere. And there was considerations of copyright. It's already published in one journal. How do I get around that? Is there a way?
Yeah, and I mean, this is one suggestion, and because my PhD is in infectious disease modeling, I do hear you. And so my suggestion would be to publish the methods in this engineering journal with maybe like a case example or an exemplar. And so you don't necessarily need to put all the clinical details unless you need to. You can sort of just use the data or evidence that you need to basically show your methods in that paper, if that's something that feels right for you. And then you can resubmit the actual clinical basis referring to that methods paper, which we wouldn't publish anyways. And so you can kind of like parse out those two pieces as best you can. I realize about repetitiveness, copyright, these kinds of things, but there is often a way to do it. It just really depends on your actual study and what's available to you. So if you have concerns about this, and you want to strategize moving forward, you could say, so if I had these two, send me an email and say, if I had these two papers and I had in this paper the methodology plus like one case report or one example case, and then I send you something similar in terms of the study type, but not the methodology, and really just all the clinical impact, would it still be considered for publication, in case that helps you then to guide your planning? I know it's something you have to do well up front, but I think it's worthwhile. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, maybe I had one other question. Maybe I'll ask. When you were describing the prioritization of papers that the Lancet Group would consider, I was curious, where does the inclusion of patient involvement? So there was the discussion of policy relevance sort of at the bottom of the slide, and I was curious to what extent is the Lancet prioritizing patient involvement throughout the research design and the conduct of the research in terms of the papers they choose to publish, whether that be experimental research, observational, quasi-experimental, et cetera.
Yeah, we prioritize it very highly. It's something we look for in terms of our, inclusion interest. If there are patient involvement, lived experience, even if there's an author with lived experience, we definitely prioritize that, because then it has more direct impact. So it's something that we look for, we encourage where possible, we're reasonable, and it's something that is extremely important. We look at the author list and we see, who are these people, where are they from, what institute, do you have patient, and especially in the early stages, not just consent, but actually patient feedback is something that is definitely something that is high on our list. So yes.
Thanks, Sherrie. And is that the kind of thing that should be highlighted in the letter, in the cover
Yes,
letter?
please do. Yeah, definitely make it a point. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, so unless anyone else has any questions, we may call the session to a close. That's going once, going twice. All right, gone. So Sherrie, thank you again for the presentation. And I think you said you were putting your email in the chat as well, if people wanted to reach out to you. So anyone interested in reaching out to Sherrie, please contact her. Okay, thank you.
I look forward to hearing from you and working together. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.